problem is this. Many neighborhoods that are predominantly full of people of color are living in poverty. These neighborhoods have cheaper real estate, and a lot of people are trying to take advantage of that. A lot of these people are white. And as they start to move into these neighborhoods, developers take an interest in the up-and-coming neighborhood and start to buy up property. Some of this will become a new craft beer restaurant, some a niche cafe. Some might be turned into a new and high-priced condo or apartment building. You would imagine that maybe you would be happy living in this neighborhood to see so much investment coming into your neighborhood, to see resources being built, parks, grocery stores, farmers markets, more bus stops, and money utilized to keep your streets clean. It all sounds idyllic. Yet the people who've called this neighborhood home will likely not be able to stay long enough to enjoy those privileges. As developers dump money into an area, they expect to see a return in the form of profit. Rent is high, gas prices go up, and if you own your home already, you may not be able to keep it based on your own property tax. This is gentrification.
Upon first arriving there, the first goal that I had was for me to identify an apartment so I could bring my wife and my new baby, Melanie, out to join me in Idaho. I immediately went to the personnel office, and in talking with the guys in personnel, they said, hey, no problem finding an apartment in Mountain Home, Idaho. The people down there love us because they know if they have an airman who's coming in to rent one of their apartments, they'll always get their money. And that was a really important thing. He says, so here's a list of people that you can call, and then they will then allow you to select the apartment that you want. So I got the list. I made the call. The lady answered on the other end, and I told her what I wanted. She said, oh, great, you called. She said, we have 4 or 5 apartments available right now. She said, do you want a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom? Then she said, let's not talk about that. Just come on down, select the apartment that you want. We'll sign the contract, and you'll have keys in your hand to get your family out here right away. So I was excited, jumped in my car, went downtown, and knocked on the door. When I knocked on the door, the woman came to the door, and she looked at me, and she said, can I help you? I said, yes. I'm the person who called about the apartments. I was just coming down to make my selection. She said, you know what? I'm really sorry, but my husband rented those apartments and didn't tell me about them. I said, you mean he rented all 5 of them in 1 hour? She didn't give me a response. And what she said was this. She said, why don't you leave your number, and if we have some openings, I'll give you a call. Needless to say, I did not get a call from her. Nor did I get any responses from the other people that they gave me on the list where I could get apartments. So as a result of that and feeling rejected, I went back to the base and I talked to the squadron commander. His name was McDowell, Major McDowell. I said, Major McDowell, I need your help. I told him what happened, and here's what he said to me. He said, James, I would love to help you. He said, but you know the problem? We can't make people rent to folks that they don't want to rent to. And besides, we have a great relationship with people in the community, and we really don't want to damage that. He said, so maybe this is what you should do. He said, why don't you let your family stay home? Because you do know you get a 30-day leave. So once a year, you can go home to your family, spend 30 days, and then come on back. Needless to say, that didn't resonate for me. So after leaving him, I went back to personnel and talking to the clerk. He said, Jim, I think I have a solution for you. He said, there's an airman who's leaving, and he has a trailer. He said, if you noticed in Mountain Home, there are trailer parks and trailers all over the place. He said, you can buy his trailer, and you'll probably get a really good deal because he wants to get out of town as soon as possible. He said, and that would take care of your problem, and that would provide the solution for you. So I immediately jumped in my car, went downtown, saw the trailer. It was a small trailer. But under the circumstances, I figured that was the best thing that I could do. So I bought the trailer, and then I asked him, I said, can I just leave the trailer here? And that would take care of all my problems. I wouldn't have to find another trailer park. He said, before I say yes to that, I need to check with management. So I got back to the base. He called me back, and management said what? No, you can't leave the trailer here because we have promised that slot to some other people. And that was strange to me because there were several other slots that were open, but it just so happens that he had promised that slot to someone else. So what I did, and he said, you shouldn't worry, Jim, because there are a lot of trailer parks. So I put out another exhaustive list of going to trailer parks. I went to one after another after another. And I got the same kind of rejection there that I received when I was looking for the apartment. As a result of this, people have come to me and say, Jim, are you angry? And my response to that is this: I don't have the luxury of being angry. I don't have the luxury of being angry. And I also know the consequences of being enraged. So therefore, the only thing that I can do is to take my collective intellect and my energy and my ideas and my experiences and dedicate myself to challenge at any point in time anything that looks like it might be racist. So the first thing I have to do is to educate. The second thing I have to do is to unveil racism. And the last thing I need to do is do everything within my power to eradicate racism in my lifetime by any means necessary.
Tracy Haddon Lowe describes the formation of segregated neighborhoods in our country by saying, growth at the subdivision scale instead of by parcel or by block created and capitulated to dominance in unprecedented urban form. Communities where detached single-family homes do not share property line or road access with anything other than single-family homes. Thus, those who can afford homes do not see or share space with households outside their real estate bracket. And these issues don't just exist in segregated neighborhoods either. She continues by saying, most recently, there's widespread evidence that the real estate finance industry targeted Black, Latino, or Hispanic neighborhoods with subprime loan products, committing reverse redlining in the years leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. As a result, foreclosure rates between 2005 and 2009 were an estimated 3.5 times higher in Black neighborhoods than in white neighborhoods and 2.7 times higher in Latino or Hispanic neighborhoods. The cumulative outcome of decades of predatory lending practices in combination with other economic trends is a dramatic erosion of home ownership concentrated in middle neighborhoods and legacy cities. This loss of home is a huge loss in capital that is occurring at a much faster rate in communities full of people of color. And at every turn, since Lincoln declared that token freedom for enslaved people, white people have prevented people of color from building capital and creating wealth to spread through their generations. There is, however, a limit to how high the population of people of color in a neighborhood can be before it won't fall victim to the gentrification. In an article from NPR, Gene Denby discusses the work of Robert Sampson and Jacqueline Huang, who found that neighborhoods who are more Black tend to stay that way. Their research into large cities with neighborhoods that are predominantly Black showed the research that there was massive disinvestment when they became mostly Black, and poor are not benefiting from the waves of new construction and new businesses that gentrification brings along with it. What's really happening is that in the neighborhoods that could use some reinvestment and renewal, they aren't even being touched. These neighborhoods aren't seeing any investments. Without that refresh, they're suffering from a lack of resources. The ideas of these researchers summarize the issue: the lack of investment in these predominantly minority-based neighborhoods while building up subdivisions out of the typical price range of people of color living in an area is causing a new kind of financially segregated neighborhood. Another problem that is seen in these neighborhoods is the problem of white flight. This is when a neighborhood becomes more Black than white and you find the white population moving out. Sometimes it's for the school districts, sometimes it's for personal reasons. But a researcher named Chrysan wanted to find out why. So she did some research with mostly white participants and asked them why. In this study, she found that there is a predictive nature to the rising population of Black people with the movement of white people. Consistent with what others have shown using the data, she says, But drawing on different dimensions of residential preferences, the strongest predictor of white flight attitudes is whether or not a person holds negative stereotypical beliefs. Whites who view blacks as having negative characteristics are much more likely to indicate that they will leave an integrating neighborhood. The chart that I'm showing here shows the first question template used in her study, asking participants how willing they would be to live in this neighborhood in each scenario. With each different scenario, they asked if they were comfortable to, or very comfortable to very uncomfortable. And they would answer somewhere in between based on what was predicted in the card. If they said that they would not try to move out, they were shown cards with higher densities of black population until they said they would try to move out or reach the fifth card showing a majority black neighborhood with 8 black families and 7 white families. Chrysan's research also included a discussion in which participants who had answered that they would move out in any of the situations described were asked an open-ended question about why they would leave. Their answers are organized in the table that I'm displaying now. It seems that the major concerns of the participants who answered were the stereotypes of what a neighborhood with a higher population of people of color looks like. More participants believed that the higher population of people of color, the higher the crime their neighborhood would have, the lower the property value, and other lessening of the desired characteristics of the neighborhood than they were concerned about being a minority or over hostility or traditional racism. This research shows that while the loud version of racism that is commonly thought of is less of the problem than is the systemic racism that is so insidious. When you see these issues together, there's a cycle that seems to repeat. People of color are relegated to specific neighborhoods based on redlining in the early 1900s. Those neighborhoods lose investment and fall into disrepair. Media sensationalizes stories of crime in predominantly black neighborhoods. White people make assumptions about those neighborhoods, and thus when people of color move into a neighborhood predominantly resided in by white people, they are discriminated against, and then white people begin to leave those neighborhoods, beginning the cycle again with lack of investment. These stereotypes bring harm in all forms, not just in housing, but in an op-ed piece in Eurasia Review, Margaret Kimberly talks about her experience as a black woman living long-term in New York City. She says, money was taken out of the cities in the 1950s and 1960s, creating what was known as white flight to the suburbs. Now the same forces have reversed themselves and are putting money back into the cities, and black people are the losers. Neighborhoods that were once afterthoughts and the butt of jokes are suddenly declared hot if a real estate spectators target them for change. Brooklyn being one of those neighborhoods, Kimberly later says, gentrification even impacts the criminal justice system. An increasingly white jury pool in Brooklyn means that defendants, mostly people of color, are more likely to be convicted. Civil cases are less likely to be decided in favor of plaintiffs, and awards are smaller as the borough's income and education levels rise. This aspect of being at racial odds with the justice system is one I hadn't even considered as I began this process. Therefore, amplifying the voices of marginalized people is such an important part of the healing and integration process. As white people, we can't imagine every aspect of the lives of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC people, that is affected by the institutional racism. As Lowe says in her article, nationwide, Black people are dying of COVID-19 at 2.4 times the rate of white people, the result of inequitable living conditions, work circumstances, underlying conditions, and low access to health care that characterize segregated neighborhoods. Although, in an article by Jerusalem Demsis, she discusses that maybe gentrification isn't the worst thing that can happen to these neighborhoods. Our focus on gentrification might lead people to believe that it is the dominant form of inequality in American cities. Our outsized focus on the phenomenon may be due in part to the fact that gentrified scholars, journalists, and consumers. About to start this project, I wanted to do my own research. I created a survey on the website SurveyMonkey, and I loaded it with 10 questions that I thought would be useful regarding people's race and their total household income, different things about how they feel about their neighborhood, and I shared it through all my social media platforms. And I think there are a lot of interesting things to be said about not only the results of it, but the people who were willing to take it. I think that it's interesting that most of the people who did participate were white. There is something to be said for the fact that I do have a lot of white people on my friends lists, but I also think that there is a significant amount of people who may not want to participate because they feel judged or they don't trust another white person to have their best interests when it comes to a topic that's so sensitive as this. As I'm sure you've noticed as I've been speaking, there have been a number of charts that have gone by, and a lot of them have been really interesting about the kind of data that we've received from the different survey answers. We've had mostly white people who mostly feel comfortable in their neighborhood, who mostly make a decent wage and feel like they're not going to be evicted or they own a home and they're comfortable with that. But as we get further on in this, I think that one of the more interesting aspects of this was the agree and disagree section. As you can see, there's a number of different questions that I had asked. I found these answers to be the most interesting of all of them. As you can see on some of these questions, like I had to move to my city or neighborhood because of the housing prices, a significant amount of people said yes to that. A lot of people wish that their neighborhood did have more racial diversity. Almost everyone believes that anti-racist housing practices should be more common. But there's been a lot of people who have had a negative impact from white people, which I think is pretty amazing, as most of the people who answered this survey are white. But also I think it's really interesting to just notice that there are people who have said that they would prefer to live near their own race. They may be people of color who do prefer that because they feel safer. Perhaps they are white people who say that it would, make them feel better to live with other white people, or people who've said, I had asked if anyone would be willing to conduct an interview with me. And I had some positive results, but after I sent out the questions, I didn't really get much in return. So I do have one response that I would love to share. And this is just a lovely piece that I think I will read in their own words. She says, being a white person, living most of my life predominantly in white neighborhoods, I have never experienced discrimination in housing. I'm responding to these questions more to share the other side of the coin. My husband's schooling and jobs have never given us the opportunity to live in a diverse setting, much to our disappointment. My husband's dream as a minister was to serve a Black congregation. We lived for a brief time in a delightful neighborhood in Grand Rapids and enjoyed the sight of our daughter walking to school with children of color. She incidentally grew up with a heart for inner city ministry. When we sold our house in Grand Rapids to a family of color, the white lady next door called and ranted angrily with me for quite a while. She had lived in the neighborhood for years and did not like to see it go downhill for the value of her house to decline. We have enjoyed the brief times when we have lived in an area with diversity. During the 27 years we have lived in Boyne City, we have observed it become more and more gentrified. Homes are being bought and built as second homes by people with serious money. I volunteer at a local food pantry, and we hear so many stories of people being kicked out of the places they have been renting so that the house could be sold for a huge profit. It breaks our hearts. And I find that this is the predominant story that I hear. I recently began working at the YWCA, where our clients are women who have been either living on the street or escaping domestic violence. And the stories are all the same, that they had to leave their house for one situation or another, and they couldn't get another apartment, or they had been in a domestic violence situation, or they lost their job and they were unable to get another house or pay their rent and they were kicked out. And we all see the gentrification effects. It doesn't only affect people of color, it's just that it does much greater harm, and it is centered in a deeper injustice in that way. There are so many ways in which the systems in America have been failing BIPOC people. There are few resources that do more than put a bandage on the problems with housing, transportation, discrimination, and so much more. There are, however, people who are trying to contrast these problems in the way that they have power. by affecting change in their own neighborhoods. Organizations like the National Community Reinvestment Coalition are lobbying for special purchase credit to be given to to first-time home buyers and to begin to help close the racial wealth gap. They are just one of many across the country attempting to bring gentrification without displacing the residents of the neighborhoods in need of monetary investment. In Somerville, Massachusetts, an organization called Union United is working together to see local communities be developed without displacing residents and putting power in the hands of people rather than investors. Another organization in Portland has similar aims. Stop Demolishing Portland is working to preserve affordable housing and historic architecture in their city. And these are just a few of the organizations that are working to end gentrification, housing discrimination, and this new form of segregation. With this good work, it's important to remember this. And as said by Chrysan, finally, white flight is clearly not the only or even the main engine behind racial residential segregation. It is not simply the individual actions of individual whites with a particular racist attitude that cause the stubborn patterns of racial residential segregation. Through research of people like Robert Sampson and Jacqueline Huang, Maria Chrysan, Tracy Haddon Lowe, I would like to thank all of the people who helped me with this project, from my peer reviewers and my instructor Tara to all of the people who took my survey, people who gave me random advice, people who encouraged me. This project has been a labor of love, and I'm very grateful that I got to learn all of the things that I have and put all of the work into this that I could. And I hope that we can all hear this message and understand that we are, as white people, still disadvantaged in the ways that we are. Some of us grew up poor, and some of us have missed opportunities or have never been given them. Um, but even that, so our skin color gives us a privilege that Black people don't have, that other people of color don't have. And I just hope that we can take this message home with us and really understand that the stories that we hear are real, and that we can really use our voices to amplify those of people of color and spread the word about what is going on and really affect change in our own world. Thank you so much.